This is Dostoevsky's most political novel, and the politics of the novel consists of 2 or 3 main themes. First, how and why the liberals abet the revolution. Second, how the revolutionaries co-opt the intelligentsia. And third, how nothing in Russia seems to be able to stop the revolution politically, though I think Dostoevsky hopes for a spiritual reinvigoration of Russia to stop its forces. The first 2 themes emerge from Pyotr Stepanovich's interactions with the liberals on the one hand and the intellectuals on the other. His goals are to paralyze and compromise the liberals, so they have to let the revolution proceed, and to implicate the intellectuals in the revolution so they cannot oppose it. Every time a Western society has revolutionaries in its midst, from the Bolsheviks to Black Lives Matter, one should turn to Dostoevsky's analysis of how these groups relate to the revolutionary movements and relearn his lessons. First, the liberals. We have talked about this a bit at the onset, but not enough. Pyotr has come to town to start a revolution, to burn the town down, and to found a new society, perhaps. He fancies himself as at the head of an international movement, and he is establishing cells all over the country to conduct the revolution. He gloms on to pre-existing institution like his father's liberal club of men to recruit foot soldiers, while disarming the town's liberal establishment. It is quite an accomplishment. It is accomplished especially in Part 2, chapters 4 through 8, beginning with All in Expectation, and culminating with Our People and Ivan the Tsarevich. There is much to say here, and there is no substitute for reading the book carefully on this matter. Let it suffice to say that the town's liberals cannot notice enemies to their left and cannot align with anyone to their right. We saw something of this in the last video. Pyotr's method is to show disrespect for the liberals and their views, and thereby win a reputation for authenticity. The liberals of the town can then think about how to harness his idealism toward ends that can be accomplished. As the governor's wife says to her husband, "You can't be angry about this, if only because you are 3 times more sensible and immeasurably higher on the social ladder. There are many leftovers of former free-thinking ways in the boy, just mischief in my opinion, but one must be gradual, not sudden. We should cherish our young people. My way is to indulge them and keep them on the brink." Yulia Mikhailiovna blamed the conservatives for driving the youth to irresponsibility and revolution. As she says to Varvara, "Only we of society, by our beneficial influence, and namely by indulgence, can we keep them from the abyss they are being pushed into by the intolerance of all these old codgers." Through this indulgence, all sorts of mischief was allowed and even accepted as a rule, some sort of it really free and easy. As I say, no enemies to the left. One can see this all over the modern world. This is why every conservative leader is transformed into Hitler. Sure, the brick throwers and the rioters are bad, but at least they aren't Trump. It's sewn into the nature of the revolutionary left. How does using the liberals help? Ultimately, Pyotr aimed to spread his brand of socialism by making people ashamed to oppose it and isolating those who would. As he confesses to Stravogin, whom he is trying to recruit into the movement right before they go and meet the cell, the main force, the cement that bonds it all, is shame at one's own opinion. There is a real force. And who was it that worked? Who was it, the sweetie, that labored so that there isn't a single idea of one's own left in anyone's head? they'll consider that shameful. Indeed, if people are ashamed of the laws that protect religion, or protect private property, or permit inequalities, they can never defend those institutions, and that therefore they make themselves susceptible to socialist claims. Some liberals are personally compromised and cannot oppose it. Others are disarmed intellectually and are forced to go with the flow. This is a theme that could be explored almost endlessly in the novel. It is a deep reflection. Read it and weep, as they say when playing poker. Next, we need to talk briefly about the relationship between the intellectuals and the members of the revolutionary cell. Dostoevsky maintains a distinction between these groups throughout, and with the socialists and liberals in a hurry being thinkers, and Pyotr Stepanovich mainly being an actor. The revolutionaries end up being a pretty weird bunch, especially the revolutionary thinkers. No chapter in Demons is funnier or more illustrative than this, called With Our People, Part 2, Chapter 7, Section 2 most especially. You have to have a heart of stone if you cannot laugh at this chapter. Recognize mockery when you see it and enjoy it. The girl student who is trying to rally everyone to relieve the suffering lot of the poor students and arouse them to protest, she is worth the price of admission into this book. The meeting with our people is a meeting of all those involved with the revolution, all those who are not mere liberals but want to use violence to change the political order. The revolutionary cell is composed of Lyshyn, Liputin, and Virginsky, members of Stepan Trepanovich's conversation club. It also consists of a lover of the people named Tolchechenko and Shigalov, the preeminent intellectual of the bunch. All of them seem to accept the idea that the world needs to be broken up, and an enlightened few will rule it over an enlightened many. How are they going to get there? Shigalov is the theorist of the bunch, as I say. He imagines the recreation of the world based on the following idea, though it has not worked out totally in his head yet. Starting from unlimited freedom, I conclude with unlimited despotism. The elimination of prejudices requires the remaking of the human landscape. Where do people pick up prejudices? Churches, families, schools. All of it will have to be brought under the control of the rational and the industrious administration. They can cultivate shame at the old opinions by destroying those institutions or taking them over. As one attendee who has read all 10 volumes of Shigalov's tome mentions, he suggests a final solution of the question, the division of mankind into two unequal parts. 1/10 is granted freedom and unlimited rights over the remaining 9/10. These must lose their person and in turn into something like a herd, and in unlimited obedience through a series of regenerations attain to primeval innocence, something like primeval paradise. Though, by the way, some of them will have to work. The measures proposed by the authors for removing the will from 9/10 of mankind and remaking them by means of re-educating of entire generations are quite remarkable, based on natural facts and extremely logical. There is a dispute about the viability of this. Lyshyn suggests simply blowing 9/10 of mankind sky high instead of re-educating them and allowing a bunch of learned people who would then start living in an educated way. Should we re-educate them or kill them? Tough questions. Disputes arise. But it is all bubblegum, namby-pamby intellectualism until Pyotr Stepanovich, who had been cleaning his fingernails throughout the whole conversation, finally speaks up. I fully agree that babbling liberally and eloquently is extremely pleasant, while acting is a bit rough. Well, anyhow, I am not a good speaker. I came here with communications, and therefore I ask the whole honorable company not even to vote, but to declare directly and simply which is more fun for you, a snail's pace through the swamp or full steam across it. They answer enthusiastically, full steam ahead, across the swamps that is pre-civilized Russia. I want to emphasize something here. Pyotr Stepanovich shows nothing but indifference or contempt for socialist theorizing. All the socialist books are merely an aesthetic pastime, useful for people who are bored in this wretched little town. Pyotr browbeats the intellectuals with talk of his secret communication into going full steam over Russia. It is even possible that Pyotr has contempt for the content of Shigalov's socialism. As he says in the next chapter while trying to recruit Stavogin to be Tsarevich, Shigalov is a man of genius. He invented equality. Great intellects cannot fail to be despots and have always been corrupted rather than been of use. They are to be banished or executed. Cicero's tongue is cut off. Copernicus's eyes are put out. Shakespeare is stoned. This is Shigalovism. Slaves must be equal. There has never yet been either freedom or equality without despotism. And without a herd, there must be equality. This is Shigalovism. I am for Shigalovism. Just so you know, he is for Shigalovism as long as he governs. And to govern is to suffer and struggle and still be human without the obedience. We will see later that the intellects are not really convinced by Pyotr's browbeating, and they object and even complain about getting their hands dirty. So there is a distinction between socialist acting and socialist intellects. We have to understand their aims, their different aims, perhaps, as we go through. Socialism certainly is a respectable garb to wrap up one's rebellious nature. Is Pyotr using socialism and its intellectuals for an entirely different project? Before answering this question, we need a deeper dive into Stavogin's very human psychology to understand his despair before figuring out why Pyotr and others escape it. Here comes a very Russian part of the novel.